Welcome to our council meeting of December 13th. If I could please have the calling of the roll by the clerk.
Mayor Sidney.
Present.
Reeve Eman.
Present.
Councillor Sobalski. Councillor Dick.
Present.
Councillor Legree.
Present.
Councillor McDonald. And Councillor McWhirter.
Present.
Mayor Sidney, we have quorum.
Thank you very much. As we gather, we would like to acknowledge on behalf of council and our community that we are meeting on the traditional territories of the Algonquin people. We would like to thank the Algonquin people and express our respect and support for their rich history, and we are extremely grateful for their many and continued displays of friendship. We also thank all the generations of people who have taken care of this land for thousands of years. Could I please have you stand for O Canada? Just going to go on to announcements and community events. I just want to take a moment to highlight the Santa Claus Parade that just happened this past weekend. First of all, huge shout out and thank you to the staff that pulled off a fantastic parade in a very short amount of time in partnership with the Renfrew BIA. So Jenna and Dan, thank you very much for standing out there all day and getting it all organized, and all the other staff that had their hands in the cookie jar as well. So it was really, really good. I have heard nothing but positives. People thought it was fantastic. Surprisingly enough, we got a lot of compliments about Santa Claus being in the fire truck. People loved it because he got lit up, and anyway, they really liked that. I think there's plans already on the go for next year. So again, thank you very much. Any other community events or anything the council has to share? Hearing none. All right. We're going to skip C.2 and 3 and go right down into our things that we have to do for work parts, and then we'll do our presentation from staff after that. So on to D.4.1. That Renfrew Town Council authorized Acting Director Wall to waive the Visitor Information Center rental fee for the monthly meetings of the Renfrew District Fur Council to be held Thursday, December 15th, 2022. I need a mover. Councilor McWhirter, Councilor Legree. Anybody want to, do we have a comment from staff or anything? Or just, no? Okay. Any questions from council? All in favor? That is carried. Thank you very much, council. On to D.5.1. I will turn it over to our CAO.
Is there a motion to receive? Yeah, there's a motion under D5.
I just got to pull it up here. I have nothing on here. Yeah, I don't have the motion. Do you want to read it?
The Renfrew Town Council received the CAO's Q4 2022 quarterly update and 2022-2023 work plan December 2022 status update.
Could I have a mover? Councillor Legree and Revimo. All in favor? No. Okay, that's good. I'll turn it over to you.
So just for your information, I provide a quarterly update to council on meetings, and you can see that I joined the town about 5 months ago, going on 6 months, and it's been a busy time. So I want to thank staff for all the work they do. I want to spend just a little bit of time talking about the goals and objectives, and these were set by the previous council. There's 25 objectives, and they're grouped in 5 goals, and I'll just enumerate the goals, and you can see that for each of these, I developed some action items with staff with associated timing and a status update, and I just wanted to thank staff for all their work, for all the progress on all these important items. So I'll just mention the goals, and if council has some detailed questions with regard to these, either now or later, and then as we get into the budget process and the strategic plan process, the work plan will evolve. But basically, when I was hired, the previous council set some strategies and goals they wanted me to achieve. So the first goal is support strategic decision-making to ensure the town meets the opportunities of today and the future. The second goal is enhance, develop, and support the Renfrew team. So a lot of the work that we're doing in terms of succession planning, getting the right people in the right seats, but also in terms of training and development. Third, support opportunities for growth through economic development, tourism, and business retention. And tonight's council orientation will be very much based on that and all the potential that we're seeing, and with the mayor's leadership, the new task force that's been established to be ready for growth. The fourth one is ensure the effectiveness and efficiency of the town of Renfrew through continuous improvement. So that's how we deliver services, how we operate, trying to do the right things, but also doing things right. And lastly, the fifth overarching goal is through collaborative leadership, support initiatives and partnerships that enhance quality of life and support the town's status as a regional hub. So some of the work of, for instance, the working group on an inclusive, age-friendly and barrier-free community tie into that, but there's also some work with some of our regional friends in terms of health and wellness. So if there's any specific questions regarding that or the series of meetings, looking ahead, we're going through council orientation. After that, it'll be the 2023 budget, and after that will be the strategic planning process. So those are the 3 things that are guiding my work, in addition to the details that are found in the plan. But I'd be happy to take any questions.
Does council have any questions for our CAO? Hearing none. All in favor? Carried. Thank you, council. On to external boards and county reports. E1 and E2, Revimo, if you have anything you would like to say to that.
Just very specific, or generally the
Mike's not on.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's surprising. I've only been in 4 meetings this week with mics. Just in general, the health unit will issue reports on a regular basis about issues around public health. And as you know, with the cost of food going up, that was a concern of the board and the staff. And so the key findings are that we do have a problem with food insecurity. And I would take you to page 3, the identifying food insecurity, and then page 4, which talks about what's left when you look at folks. So especially one person household on Ontario Works, their minus $279 at the end of the month, and it doesn't get any better for other people in single person households. At the end of the month, a person on old age security, in theory, has $787 after they paid for their rent and their monthly, what I call their monthly regulars in terms of heat and hydro and things like that. So right now, 1 in 7 or 13.3% of households are suffering from food insecurity, and that's defined as roughly half of the food insecure households in Canada report wages, salaries, or self-employment as their main source of income. So it's a pretty significant issue for us in the community, and one that I think you're going to hear more about. 1 in 5, when you go to page 5, 1 in 5 or 20.6% of children under the age of 18 live in a food insecure household. And as we know, food has a very significant contributors to success for children as they attend school and go about their lives. So that's very concerning. They're more inclined to, children are more inclined to develop asthma, mental health conditions, low self-esteem, lack of self-confidence. So all of those things last with them throughout their lives. You'll see some solutions that are proposed and how you can take action. So this is just presented essentially for your information. I think you'll see more coming from it. I suspect there are going to be some larger efforts made across our community, and we'll be asking for input in the next little while.
Thank you very much. Does council have any questions for Revimo? Perfect. Now we'll go on to what would be classified as the main event of tonight's evening. So we'll turn it over to, I guess we're going to go straight to the planner. Is that the way we're going? Director Withers. I'll turn it over to you for your presentation.
Still the planner, thanks, Mayor City. Appreciate that. So this evening I will endeavor not to bore you with too many details, but I am going to go into quite a bit of detail. So hopefully you are well caffeinated and got some sleep last night. And if at any point you have any questions or want me to slow down on anything, feel free to let me know. And so here we go. I've tried to make this as comprehensive as possible, I'm going to say. There may be some things that you have questions about that I don't cover, and in that event, I think maybe the best course of action would be to do it through email, and then we can get it out to all of council, so everyone's got a copy of whatever additional information, whether it's related to a policy or the Planning Act or a particular subject matter, and we'll kind of go from there. But I've tried to be as kind of comprehensive as possible, and so I want to start from, I guess, 30 or 40,000 feet in terms of the discipline of land use planning writ large and what that is, kind of where it came from. So it's a branch of architecture. It is about, I'm going to say, about 100 years old, give or take. And what you see here is, actually I've just kind of cropped out a couple of pictures of the plan of Chicago. And it's known as the Burnham Plan. And it was actually commissioned by the Commercial Club of Chicago. It was actually, believe it or not, it was a privately initiated document. So everyone thinks about planning as this, as something that's largely a function of government. The first plan, the first land use plan, was actually commissioned privately by the Commercial Club. It would be kind of equivalent to our Chamber of Commerce. And it followed from, it was done in 1909, and it followed from the 1893 World's Fair. And after the World's Fair, I think that, they had such a, Chicago status elevated to the level where I think everyone, realized we need to look to the future and what the city could look like. And so they commissioned this document, and they retained Daniel Burnham and Edward Bennett to prepare this document that you see here. And it is widely recognized as the first official plan, if you will, that was ever prepared. And so you'll see in the map itself, it actually looks fairly similar to a lot of the land use schedules that you'll see in official plans today. You'll see different land use categories. You'll see, density gradients. So, older school planning in large cities, you have the central business district, and then you have kind of radii of land uses and densities that flow from that. And then you see other interesting features, of traditional architecture like symmetry and proportion. You'll see an interesting system of parkland, a network. You have the waterfront, which they've paid a lot of attention to. Chicago is actually famous for its waterfront. If you've never been there, they've reserved incredibly valuable land for the purposes of parkland development. So they have Soldier Field, the War Museum, Millennium Park, Botanical Gardens, and it's actually beautiful. So anyways, this is very famous in my line of work, and we went on a field trip when I was in planning school. We went to Chicago and went on a tour, and this was kind of part of our research and our preparation for it. So interesting, but I thought I would just throw it in there. Just for information purposes and for your interest. But planning defined, so what is it? So just going back to that other slide there, Tori. It's defined as the use of land, resources, facilities, and services in a way that secure the physical, economic, and social efficiency, health, and well-being of urban and rural communities. So it's generally related to the thoughtful disposal of resources and land. So it envisions the disposal of those things in a way that isn't haphazard or, without thought to the benefit of future generations or the connectivity of land and how it works together. And it's particularly important in rural communities, and it's also important for other reasons. It's very important in urban communities and also important in rural communities, but for different reasons. The goal is to foster communities that grow, again, in an orderly fashion. They function well. They have a desirable mix of land uses to support residential, economic, and institutional needs. They're safe, they're accessible, they have suitable services, facilities, and infrastructure, and they preserve valuable natural and cultural resources for present and future generations. So it's a big definition, and there's a lot to think about, but it's a pretty important function. So we'll go to the next slide. So we looked at the discipline of land use planning. So now we'll talk a little bit about what a land use planner is. And you may or may not be aware, but we are a credentialed profession. We are regulated by the Ontario Professional Planners Institute Act. We have a national governing body, the Canadian Institute of Planners, and we have a provincial arm. There's one for each province. Ours is the Ontario Professional Planners Institute. Credentialed planners, so a planner that has their full credentials, will typically be both a member of the Canadian Institute of Planners and a registered professional planner. And the RPP designation is required in order to serve as a professional planner and represent yourself as such in the province of Ontario. In order to get to that point, in order to be an MCIP RPP, you typically will need a combination of an accredited professional degree. There are a handful of them in the country, in fact. You'll need at least 2 years of work experience if you have a professional degree, and up to 8+ if you have a related degree but it's not accredited. You need a year of mentorship. You need to complete an ethics examination and a professional examination. So at minimum, if you were to just take the minimum amount of time, the fastest route, you're looking at approximately 6 years to achieve your designations. And I'll note that you're also required to maintain this annually. You have to complete, similar to other disciplines, you have to do continuous professional learning credits, which is equivalent to roughly 18 hours of either coursework or workshops annually. Okay, roles in the planning process. So there are different functions, different roles, different stakeholders, if you will. With respect to staff and the planner's role, okay, I'm focusing primarily on planners that are employed by the municipality. There are also planning consultants. They have similar responsibilities to provide recommendations that are in the public interest. There may be occasionally the perception that someone who is retained as a consultant is in the pocket of a developer or is has a bias. Registered professional planners are required by our code of ethics to provide recommendations, regardless of who we work for, that are primarily in the public interest. We do have duties to our employers and to clients as applicable, but our primary interest and obligation is to the public, and we're required to provide our advice in an objective and unbiased, uninfluenced fashion. At the staff level, we review, provide recommendations and comments, and process planning applications in accordance with Planning Act requirements. We are required to be fluent with the Planning Act, experts, if you will. It's becoming more challenging as of the last 12 months because of how much it has changed. But hopefully within the following 12 months, I will once again be an expert on the Planning Act. That's my hope. We're required to undertake public and agency consultation, excuse me, on behalf of the municipality and on planning matters in accordance with the Planning Act requirements, including notices and meetings as applicable. We prepare reports summarizing planning applications. We summarize the applicable policy and legislation. We recommend a course of action for council. We issue decisions on applications within the scope of delegated authority. And we act as an expert witness if the need arises in the event of an Ontario Land Tribunal appeal to a matter being processed by the municipality. So on occasion, there are matters that are subject to appeal, which means your decision is not final until 20 days after that decision has been made and no one has appealed the decision to the Ontario Land Tribunal. If it is appealed, the decision that the municipality has made is not valid, and the decision resides with the Ontario Land Tribunal to dispose of it as it sees fit. And the timing on that is, unfortunately, traditionally has been quite long. I think they're trying to shorten that. There are increasingly limited circumstances where an appeal is eligible. So hopefully moving forward, the matters that are under the tribunal will be disposed of a bit more quickly. Your role as municipal council, so you are responsible to be informed with respect to planning applications and matters where council is the approval of the authority. Some matters are going to be on the face of them very straightforward and simple and easy to understand, some of them more complex. If they are going to you for a decision, it is incumbent upon you to be informed about them, to read the report, to ask questions if you have them, to review the materials made available to you. It's very important to be informed. As I noted, review staff reports. Consider public comments on planning matters where consultation is required. So it'll be in the form of public meetings, written comments that are submitted. Again, on occasion, when matters are before you, you will be required to make decisions on planning matters in accordance with applicable policy and legislation. And sometimes those decisions will not be popular. The planning process does not result in everyone being happy with every outcome. That's unfortunately just the reality. But your decision should ultimately be informed and based on the applicable policy and legislation. Okay, the role of the County of Renfrew. The County of Renfrew under the Planning Act, and just next slide there, is the upper tier municipality. They have the approval authority with respect to local official plans and plan. Sorry, I think it's just this TV that's not moving forward. This happens to be the one I'm looking at. That's okay. Take this opportunity. That's okay. I'll look at a different screen. Maybe mine. That's all good. Okay. The County of Renfrew, being the upper tier municipality under the Planning Act, is responsible for the approval of local official plans and plan amendments. So it will be put to you for a decision to develop and approve an official plan. And then it will be, or adopt an official plan, and then it will be put to the County of Renfrew for final approval. And the same applies to any amendments to our official plan. The county is responsible for approval of its official plan. So there is a county official plan, as we'll see, and a local official plan. It's responsible for approving its own as well, and amendments to that plan. It's responsible for approval of applications for any subdivision of land, including draft plans of subdivision or condominium. It's responsible for the approval of consents, which are also known as severances, except where delegated to a local municipality, such as been delegated to us in the town of Renfrew. And they provide support regarding mapping, GIS, data management by request. And I think I missed one. They provide municipal plan review, which is a set of data that the province provides and kind of feeds out to upper tier municipalities, which they then make available to the local municipalities for the purposes of review of planning applications. The role of the province. So the province, again, our system is a top-down planning system, which means that we are required to be consistent with and conform to and comply with the applicable legislation and policy that the province puts into effect. And of course, municipalities being creatures of the province, we are subject to legislation that the province puts in place. So that applies with respect to the Planning Act, the provincial policy statement, other provincial legislation, and there's a list of it. Provincial plans, we do not have a provincial plan that applies to the County of Renfrew. There are several that apply in Southern Ontario, and provincial guidelines. Provincial ministries may provide comments on planning applications, including the Ministry of Transportation, Ministry of the Environment, Conservation and Parks, Ministry of Northern Development and Mines, Natural Resources and Forestry, Ministry of Culture, Tourism and Sport. And they do, again, provide our land use data to support us in our plan review. The local municipal role in county planning matters, so kind of going the other way. We do review and comment on County of Renfrew planning applications, including consents where they're not delegated, plans of subdivisions, so subdivision applications are made through the county, and then they are forwarded to us for our comment. We are not the approval authority with respect to subdivisions and condominiums, and they do provide us with the opportunity to comment on county official plan amendments. And we review those applications with respect to our interests, involving roads, water, sewer, stormwater, emergency planning, recreation, engineering, legal, securities, agreements, all as applicable. And we do provide notice and hold public meetings for subdivisions and condominiums and some county official plan amendments. So those are the various roles in the planning process. Now, in terms of the hierarchy or the framework of legislation and policy that we operate in the province of Ontario, and I emphasize this is throughout the province of Ontario. We are not the only municipality subject to this legislation. This is how planning works throughout the province of Ontario. So when the province changes something like they do with Bill 23, it affects all of us. It's a top-down process. So it starts with the Planning Act. The Planning Act establishes matters of provincial interest in Section 2. And it has regulations that provide the flesh or puts meat on the bones of the legislation, if you will. So things like required circulation distances and things like that, who we have to seek comment from for planning applications. The Planning Act also enables and requires consistency and conformity with provincial policy. So in our case, we have the provincial policy statement, and that applies throughout the province. It's a shorter piece of policy material, and it covers things at a relatively high level. We'll kind of look at it shortly. And then again, the provincial plans, which again apply more locally throughout the province, and we do not have one at this time. The next layer of policy are the upper tier official plans. So in our case, we have the County of Renfrew official plan. We also have lower tier official plans being our official plan, and then down to zoning bylaws. And then beyond zoning bylaws, you could go even further with the site plan control bylaw, the sign bylaw, other bylaws that we use to implement land use and development within the town of Renfrew. Okay, the Planning Act, being the highest level of planning legislation in the province of Ontario. Again, it governs the use of land, broadly speaking. It provides the authority to municipalities to make decisions on land use matters. It establishes a system by which various types of land use and development applications are to be evaluated and disposed of. So it gives us the process. It establishes the requirements that we have for public and agency consultation with respect to land use and development matters. So every time we send out a notice, post a notice, hold a public meeting, circulate an application, anytime we do that, it is as prescribed by the Planning Act and its regulations. It establishes, as I've noted, a hierarchy of land use planning policies and legislation and mandates conformity and consistency with these documents. It establishes a criteria and process for the subdivision of land, including plans of subdivision, condominium, and consent, or as it's commonly called, severance. There are various standards of compliance, and when you're in planning school, you kind of learn about these and they're emphasized. It's language that most people would just kind of gloss over, but it's important, and it's important because if you end up at the Ontario Land Tribunal, the standards, they're called standards of implementation, they're paid attention to, okay? So the first standard and kind of the lowest standard is have regard to, and we're required to have regard to what are called the matters of provincial interest, and we'll look at those in a moment. We're required to be consistent with the provincial policy statements. So be consistent with is, you know, you should be following them very closely, okay? It doesn't have to be, you know, like spooning, you know, spoons in a drawer, so to speak. That's conformity, but you should be relatively consistent with them. And then the highest standard of implementation is conformity. That's the picture is spoons in a drawer, okay? So if a provincial plan says something and it sets out a standard, you are required to imitate or replicate that standard exactly, okay? So and that standard applies to provincial plans and official plans, and in our case with upper tier official plans. Okay, continuing on, the Planning Act. Section 2 lays out what are called, again, the matters of provincial interest. And it's a long list, and I'm not going to go through all of them. But it's a long list and it's a broad list. So these are all the things that you have to think about as a planner and as a council when matters are put to you for a decision. These are all things that you need to be having regard to. And ideally, you will be having regard to these in your official plan. And then you will be required to conform to your official plan in your planning decisions. So these, you know, these policies and legislation, they don't exist in isolation. They ideally exist together and speak to each other. They should be, you know, singing the same song. So when you make a decision that conforms to your official plan, you should be addressing these matters of provincial interest. And again, I won't go through them all, but they are quite broad. And maybe we'll go to the provincial policy statement slide. The provincial policy statement, we're required to be consistent with the provincial policy statement. Again, broad policy direction, but given that the standard of implementation is higher than have regard to, this gets looked at the OLT. Okay, the PPS is a very significant document. And it's generally broken down into 3 categories: building strong and healthy communities, the wise use and management of resources, and protecting public health and safety. And again, broadly speaking, you're looking at, with building strong and healthy communities, you're looking at policies, you're looking at land use, you're looking at where growth and development should be happening, you're looking at land use compatibility, employment areas, housing, public spaces, recreation, parks, trails, infrastructure and public service facilities. You're looking at long-term economic prosperity, energy conservation, air quality and climate change. With respect to Section 2, wise use and management of resources, you're looking, generally speaking, at natural heritage, water, agriculture, minerals and petroleum, mineral aggregate resources, and cultural heritage and archaeology. And Section 3, in regards to protecting public health and safety, you're looking at natural and man-made hazards. And again, as I noted, you are looking to reflect, or in some cases even replicate, these policies in your municipal official plan. So when you go through an official plan review, you look to the provincial policy statement. Anything that has changed in the 5 years since you did your last official plan review, you need to be updating your official plan to reflect the new policies in the provincial policy statement. The next layer down, the County of Renfrew official plan. The implementation standard is we are required to conform, our decisions and our policies are required to conform with the upper tier official plan. Upper tier official plans, traditionally speaking, are intended to provide a higher level of policy direction, generally dealing with matters that are cross-jurisdictional in nature. They don't stop at a municipal boundary, okay? We're talking about natural heritage policies, county transportation, growth management. It's a requirement in the provincial policy statement, agricultural lands, archaeological resources, waterfront development, things that shouldn't be different no matter where you are in the County of Renfrew. Now, I'll note that the County of Renfrew official plan is unique probably in the province of Ontario in one very important way, in that for any municipality in the County of Renfrew that has its own official plan, the vast majority of the county official plan does not apply. And this is, again, very unique in the province of Ontario. 4 years ago when I was in the Niagara region, the regional official plan applied in its entirety to all lands and all municipalities within the Niagara region. And so you had to make sure, again, that you were consistent with and conform to conform to the regional official plan. And they had very detailed policies that applied, again, across the region. It's a little bit different in Renfrew County. It allows local municipalities to be a bit more autonomous in how we plan our communities. There are still some things that we need to, doesn't mean that the whole county official plan doesn't apply to us, but the vast majority of the general development policies, as an example, do not apply to municipalities that have their own official plans. So that's very unique in the province of Ontario. Next layer down, the Town of Renfrew official plan. Local official plans, generally speaking, provide more detailed policy guidance on matters of local interest. They establish land use designations across the municipality, being residential, commercial, downtown commercial, industrial, parks and recreation, environmental protection, designated growth area. In our case, you'll see the land use schedule. It's usually very colorful, usually very attractive. But it actually does something, okay? It does establish the development pattern throughout the town. It's based on orderly development and growth. Typically, we like to see development happen that is contiguous with existing development, means it's beside it. You know, where the pipe ends, that's where it should start again, that kind of thing. Typically we have areas, you know, that are more sensitive or they're say noxious emitters like industrial areas that are going to be kind of areas that are not near more sensitive land uses. So the yellow areas in our official plan are residential areas. You usually don't see yellow areas and the brown areas, you know, kind of intermixed. They are adjacent in some cases, and where they are adjacent, we have to make sure that we are buffering or mitigating impacts to the extent possible. But ideally, you know, we are ensuring that impacts from industrial areas are not experienced by more sensitive residential or institutional land uses. Official plans beyond land use designations also provide implementation policies as required by the Planning Act, providing, you know, for things like site plan control, land division policies, public consultation policies, pre-application consultation, or as we kind of truncate it, pre-consultation policies, policies with respect to holding provisions, as we'll put on lands from time to time, provisions with respect to minor variance, community improvement plan areas. So in many cases, the Planning Act says that you can do something providing you have policies in your official plan that speak to that matter. And so we have a number of implementation policies to address those matters. Official plans are required to be updated every 5 years, very generally speaking. And I kind of say that tongue-in-cheek because there are municipalities, and I'm not going to name any names, but the County of Renfrew. No, let's just say that official plan reviews are not always very neat and tidy processes. There are, and especially in the case of the county, there are a number of interests at play, a number of municipalities at play. They've got to parade it around to every municipality. And again, usually not everyone's happy. They've got to deal with a long list of comments. So we'll cut them some slack. It did take them, a bit longer. But generally speaking, every 5 years. And, we're no shining example. We did do ours in 2018, but I think it was a bit of time before that, before we had done our 5-year review. So we are coming up on that. We're gonna be doing that next year. And, but again, you're required to do it. It's a conformity exercise. And so you look at the policy that you're required to conform with and be consistent with, and all the changes that have taken place in that 5 years. And you also look at the direction you want your community to take. You look at the growth that you anticipate to be happening in your municipality and where that's going to happen and how much of it it's going to, likely going to be. And you consider all those things and you come up with not necessarily a brand new document, but you will in many cases amend it. But there is the opportunity to just throw the whole thing out and put a new one in. Traditionally, people didn't like to do that because then you exposed your entire official plan, even the parts that you didn't really change, to appeal. The province has been trying to kind of address that by saying you can't really, at different points to say, well, you can't really appeal the whole official plan. You can only appeal certain parts. So you have to have a defined piece. Like, what do you really have an issue with? You can't just appeal the whole thing. But in some cases, we will just kind of repeal the whole thing and put a new one in place. Local official plans, when an upper tier official plan is updated, we have to update ours, technically speaking, within 1 year. And the recourse there is that the upper tier municipality or the province, the minister in right of the province, will just amend it for you. And typically they don't do that. It's probably I'm not even sure it's happened, to be perfectly honest. And if it has, it's on such rare occasions that it's not even it's not even really well known. But generally speaking, if your plan hasn't been updated, they'll kind of cut you a little bit of slack, but the expectation is that you do that. And I already spoke to the county official plan piece and how it applies. Okay, Town of Renfrew zoning bylaw. Okay, so now we're getting down into more detail. So when someone walks in with a building permit, one element of what's called applicable law is a zoning bylaw. So whereas we cannot evaluate a building permit against the policies of an official plan, we can evaluate it against the provisions of a zoning bylaw. So zoning bylaws are enabled through Section 34 of the Planning Act, and they are enabled as a function of restricting the use of land, restricting the erection, location, or use of buildings and structures, and prohibiting the erection of structures or use of land that have various physical characteristics, including marshy, rocky, steep, and unstable slopes, hazardous, contaminated land. So zoning bylaws, generally speaking, are a prohibitive or a restrictive document, and they're typically worded in such a way as, it usually says at the beginning, no land in the town of Renfrew can be used for any purpose except as established within this zoning bylaw. And it's important because some of the changes that the province has made under Bill 23 have basically said any zoning bylaw that applies to restrict, for example, the use of land up to 3 units on fully serviced residential properties does not apply. So this leaves a question in my mind, and hopefully a question that's going to be answered in a fairly short period of time by the province and other very smart people. That what happens to our zoning bylaw when it now says that you can't use land zoned R1 for anything more than 2 units. So do we now no longer have an R1 zone? That's a good question. So these are the kinds of things that we have to think about when we think about zoning bylaws. Section 45 of the Planning Act allows us to vary zoning bylaws. So zoning bylaws, strictly speaking, are a very rigid and flexible document. When they say you have to have a 3-meter setback from an exterior side lot line, it's exactly 3 meters. So I've had zoning reviewers throw out applications that had 2.9 meters, and you know, you round it up to 3. Unfortunately, zoning bylaws are very rigid documents. There's an interpretation section that says, you know, you round up, you know, to 2 decimal places or whatever it is. But generally speaking, they are quite a rigid and flexible document. So Section 45 of the Planning Act provides that you can vary the provisions of the zoning bylaw. You cannot establish new land uses, but when something says you have to be 3 meters from a property line, and you really want it to be, you know, say like 2 or 2.5, then you can apply for what's called a minor variance. And minor variances are based on, are evaluated based on 4 tests that are established by Section 45 sub 1. And they are not, unfortunately, enumerated for us. We have made law over the years, and lawyers and really smart folks at the Ontario Land Tribunal or previously the OMB have established that there are 4 tests within, embedded within Section 45 sub 1 that are required to be evaluated for minor variances. So first of all, is it minor? And this is not a numerical exercise. Typically, you will look at it and oftentimes and say, you know, this seems numerically like it is potentially not minor. Or on the inverse, numerically, this isn't really a significant reduction that they've asked for. What you really should be looking at is the variance minor in terms of impact? So if someone is asking to, to move a shed, half a meter closer to a lot line where on the adjacent property, the neighboring house is on the lot line, well, the impact of that half-meter reduction could be quite significant. Okay, whereas numerically it might not seem to be all that significant. The second test is it desirable for the appropriate development or use of the land? And this is an evaluation piece, so you evaluate it, evaluate the application on its merits, on the basis of the material submitted. Typically on visual inspection of the property, the types of land uses or structures that are going to be permitted through the variance, and whether that is considered to be appropriate. And it has to meet the general intent and purpose of both the official plan and the zoning bylaw. So in many cases, this isn't, some folks will say this is not a very rigid standard, but it has to be, it has to be pretty consistent with it. Okay, so it doesn't have to, again, because we're talking about a variance to the zoning bylaw as an example, it doesn't have to meet the zoning bylaw exactly. It has to definitely meet the general intent and purpose of it. There are other types of bylaws under Section 34 that a municipality may pass from time to time. A holding bylaw, a holding bylaw or a holding symbol is something that you can place on property if you want to prevent the issuance of a building permit until such time as certain criteria have been met, whether it's servicing or if the site or if it's a property that has the potential for significant archaeological resources, or if there are unstable slopes that have yet to be evaluated, or if the lands are potentially contaminated and they need to be evaluated. You might place a holding symbol on the property so that we do not go ahead and issue a building permit, because in many cases we can't require these studies in the absence of a holding provision. So we prevent the issuance of a building permit until such time as these matters have been dealt with, and then we lift the holding provision, a building permit can be issued. Interim control bylaws, if you want to prohibit or restrict the use of land, whether to a particular area of town or across the town, broadly speaking, for any particular purpose. The temporary use of land, which is exactly the way it sounds. Garden suites, which are a temporary residential use intended to typically, house family members that need care, are good to have kind of on the property, and so this provides for a temporary housing solution. It's kind of been in the Planning Act for a long time. I think some of these other more recent amendments to the Planning Act are going to potentially start to take the place of garden suites as kind of more affordable or accessible housing. Minor zoning bylaw amendments may be delegated For example, holding or temporary use bylaws, another category that council might consider delegating and that other municipalities have delegated are zoning bylaw amendments required as a condition of an uncontested severance application. So in many cases, we might put a condition saying that you have to rezone property to, if you, as an example, if you have a large piece of property and you're out in the country or you're in an area that you want to limit for one reason or another the number of severances, say you're on very valuable agricultural land, you might require that the applicant rezone the retained portion, the balance of the land. We'll say, we'll give you the lot, you got to rezone the balance of the land so you cannot subdivide the land further. So you can delegate that to staff or to a committee just to expedite the process. And the idea is that if it's an uncontested consent, no one's submitted comments objecting to the application, no one has attended a public meeting objecting to the application, there is a very significant likelihood that no one is going to have an issue with the zoning bylaw. That is a condition of that consent. Okay? Moving right along. Site plan control. Section 41 of the Planning Act. Councils may by bylaw establish a site plan control area. We have one. Bylaw 4585. It is an oldie but a goodie. It does the job. It essentially says that the town of Renfrew in its entirety is a site plan control area, and for certain residential and non-residential developments, you require what is called site plan control. It typically applies traditionally to multiple residential, so apartment style or higher density residential developments. Under Bill 23, it's now anything over 10 units. So 10 units and under, you can't require site plan control. And then generally speaking, most non-residential, so commercial industrial development will be subject to site plan control. And the idea here is that you are regulating beyond what you would consider through a zoning bylaw, which only really deals with the physical configuration of development on a project. So setbacks, height, volume, those kinds of things. Zoning, again, is very, it's a kind of a crude instrument. You use site plan control to address other matters on a more complex site, so matters of internal access and vehicular circulation, parking, emergency access, on-site servicing. So if you have a larger development like Lapine, you're going to have a pretty a fairly complex water and wastewater system that you're going to want to take a longer look at, as opposed to, say, someone just building a house in an established area of town. So through a site plan, you're going to look at things like the massing and conceptual design of the proposed building. You're going to look at the relationship of the building to adjacent buildings, streets, et cetera. You're going to look at interior walkways. You're going to look at, we can look at things like green building standards. You're going to look at exterior access to each building if it contains affordable housing units. You're going to look at sustainable design elements. And you're going to look at facilities designed to have regard for accessibility for persons with disabilities, among other matters. So one thing that was recently taken out through Bill 23 was the ability to regulate architectural and landscape design features. So that has now been removed from the scope of site plan approval. So traditionally we would ask for what are called architectural elevations. You would look at color and material. You would look at even things like window placement and, you know, proportion and things like that. And if you're in an area that has a real eye for architecture, like Niagara on the Lake, you might even have an urban design committee that would look in great detail at the architecture and landscape design features, and that has been removed as something that you can regulate through the site plan control process. And I think the idea there is that, again, along with many of the other things through Bill 23, the province is trying to expedite things. Site plan approval must be delegated to staff. That's through Bill 109 from this spring. We have done that, so now all site plan approval applications are processed at the staff level, as are any conditions of site plan approval, including agreements which are reviewed in their standard form by our solicitor, and they are reviewed in their compiled form by our solicitor prior to execution by the mayor and clerk. Okay, subdivision control, moving right along. So Section 50 establishes control over the division of land. Generally, there are various exceptions, including any time that a municipality sells land, we are not subject to subdivision control. But generally speaking, you may not convey an interest in land if you own abutting land. And so what that means is that it's under the same ownership. Okay, so you'll hear this concept of merger, and what happens there is if you don't have a consent, or you are not a whole lot within a registered plan of subdivision, or you don't meet one of the other exception criteria in Section 50 sub 3, you will then be precluded from transferring that portion of land that you purchase. So you have to be very careful when you purchase land. You have to make sure that your lawyer does their due diligence and that they prevent merger in the event that that you don't want that to happen. Sometimes you do, if you're assembling land, for example. Section 50 sub 3, or Section 50 sub 5 rather, establishes the concept of part lot control, which is when you have land within a registered plan of subdivision, you may want to further subdivide land. And this is most commonly the case when you have blocks of land within a registered plan of subdivision that you cannot and should not survey until they are built. And this is, in the most classic case, this happens with attached units. So you don't want a surveyor out there laying down lot lines until foundations are in place, because they're good, but they're not that, it's just like the foundation folks are good, but they're not that good. Okay, and you do want those lot lines to be right smack down the middle. So what they'll do is they will create a block of land through a draft plan of subdivision or a final plan of subdivision. They will build the multiple attached unit, and then they will then survey the foundations. They will apply for part lot control to the municipality. The municipality will pass a part lot control bylaw, lifting part lot control on that block, and then they can go to the land registry office and transfer those individual units within the survey that's passed as part of the part lot control bylaw. Okay, Section 51 establishes the process for the approval of planned subdivision condominium. So Section 50 establishes the process in the institution of subdivision control, saying you may or you may not convey land except in these circumstances. Section 51 and 53 then go and they establish the process by which you may receive approval to convey a part of land. Section 51 deals with approval of plans of subdivision. The Condominium Act piggybacks on Section 51. It uses the same process in the majority of cases. With plans of subdivision, you are dealing with a higher order or a larger scale of development. So you're dealing with, in many cases, dozens or hundreds of lots, in some cases for very large ones, 1,000+ units. You are dealing with that through the approval of a plan of subdivision. The review of a plan of subdivision is a more rigorous process, typically involving the submission of more studies, sometimes involving the peer review of those studies where applicable. And then you would approve the plan of subdivision, which approves the plan of subdivision subject to a set of conditions. Typically, there are quite a few. And those conditions will typically involve detailed design, the entering into a subdivision agreement, the conveyance of easements or lands for parks purposes, or cash in lieu of parkland dedication. And it can sometimes take quite a while for those conditions to be cleared. An example would be our Hunter Gate subdivision within the town of Renfrew. That has been draft approved for some time and has been final approved in phases, because you have to go through the detailed design, get all those details worked out, deal with each of the utilities, enter into agreements with each of those entities, and then they go through a process of construction and assumption of the services, and then you final approve, and then you can eventually convey the lot. So it's quite an involved process as compared to the consent or the severance process, which is generally when you are looking at the creation of a handful of lots. You know, you're going to be looking at, in most cases, you're not going to be going beyond 3 or 5 lots through the consent process. And typically, you're looking at the services are already there, the road's already been built, there's not really any significant, implementation issues with respect to, grading or drainage or anything like that. You can deal with some elements of those through the consent process, but generally speaking, you want to be satisfied that you don't need a plan of subdivision to implement the severances. And so it's just a lower order, if you will, land division process. And it also, beyond new lots, also applies to the creation of easements, lot additions, so if you want to take land and add it to an adjacent lot, those kinds of things. Okay, agreements under the Planning Act. So there are various forms of agreements that the Planning Act enables municipalities to enter into to implement development approvals of various kinds. You have site plan agreements, you have subdivision agreements, and you have development agreements, which generally apply to Section 45 minor variances. You can implement them through as a condition of a minor variance decision and as a condition of the provisional approval of a consent or a land severance. The vast majority of agreements, in fact, all the ones that I just mentioned, are able to be registered on the title of the property. That is done with the Land Registry Office, and what that does, it ensures that future owners are aware of the agreement and its obligations, so they can't claim ignorance. When you buy a piece of property, you'll get a whole stack of paper from your lawyer, and if they're worth their salt, every agreement that applies and is registered on the title of that property will be included in that package. And so it's a good idea to actually read it and open the envelope. I know some people don't, but you may be subject to an agreement that you are not aware of, and you will have certain obligations under that. A very common one is an obligation to maintain the established grades within an approved subdivision. You can't just go around with a mini X or, go get a cat and start digging around your backyard and start changing things. They've been designed that way for a reason. The water runs in a certain direction, and it doesn't mean you can't change the grades, but you need to call the town engineers and an engineering technician and make sure that that's still going to work well for the subdivision. Agreement templates, we don't just kind of come up with these off the top of our heads. We produce them in in cooperation with the town solicitor. And before we get the mayor or clerk to execute them, we again have the solicitor review them to make sure that we are covering all our bases and that the town's interests are maintained, and we will send that draft to the proponent as well to have them look at it and give their solicitor an opportunity, or if they would like, to review it before execution. Agreements entered into as a condition of approval issued under delegated authority, just because it makes sense, are also delegated, subject again to review by the town solicitor. Okay, delegation of authority. The Planning Act permits various approvals that are issued by the town to be delegated to an officer or an employee or an agent of the municipality or a committee thereof for the purposes of issuing decisions. And the idea behind that is you are, where appropriate and feasible, you are trying to eliminate an unnecessary process or red tape to try to move things along quicker where it's appropriate. And the emphasis here is that the vast majority, and this might seem odd and kind of counterintuitive, but in fact the vast majority of planning matters are in fact uncontested. That doesn't mean that people don't have an interest in them. That doesn't mean that we don't get questions about them. That doesn't mean that you're not going to have anyone at council or at a public meeting just kind of wanting to know what's going on. But the vast majority of planning matters, people don't really have an issue with, okay? And there's a reason for that. And people think that they get the impression that everything that comes to council, is approved, that the town just approves everything. And that's not the case. And the reason that's not the case is because we try to be diligent about screening out projects that are non-starters. If we are not able to clearly support an application, we will make sure that the applicant does not waste their time and money producing reports that are going to be of no value because they're not able to address policy requirements or meet town, county, or provincial standards or legislation. So that is the reason that when the vast majority of matters that come to council come here with our support. Okay, we have screened out the chaff. You are ideally getting wheat only when it comes to council or when it gets to the point of a decision by the municipality. Delegated approvals, they are required to adhere to all Planning Act process. When staff or when a committee makes a decision, they don't skip a bunch of steps. They don't fail to circulate it to prescribed public bodies or members of the public. We're still required to hold public meetings as applicable, post notice, circulate notice, et cetera, et cetera. It follows the same process. The only difference is that we don't then have to hit a committee or council schedule, which in some cases burns an extra month, and depending on when snow flies or when frost hits, that matters to some developers, so we're able to be a bit more agile. Okay, the idea here is we're balancing process efficiency with the need to adhere to policy requirements, and again, making decisions that are in the public interest. Okay, parkland dedication, section 42 of the Planning Act. As a condition of development or redevelopment of land, municipalities may require the conveyance of a portion of land for park or other public recreation purposes. In the case of residential development, we're talking about not greater than 5% of the land or the value in cash thereof. And for all other land uses, typically commercial, industrial, we're talking about not greater than 2% or the cash value thereof. In many cases, developers would prefer the cash value, and this is typically in cases where you're looking at industrial or commercial developments. You're probably not going to want to have a park right beside a sawmill or a manufacturing plant. They're going to be paying cash in lieu. The same is the case on Stewart Street or Bryan, in the middle of a commercial area. You're probably not going to have a park there, so they would pay cash in lieu. We would typically look at conveyance of land in the case of things like a subdivision, draft plan subdivision, where you can have people living there. Okay, we probably do want to have parkland, land for people to use locally. And it can be a combination of the two. Okay, it can be dedication of land plus cash. Okay, and we would use that cash to either purchase land elsewhere in the municipality or improve our existing parkland. Okay. Okay, current planning application process, typical. Okay, so this is just what the current workflow is with the vast majority of planning application processes. We start, and increasingly, and under Bill 109, and you're going to hear about that next year, we have to adopt an official plan amendment to deal with Bill 109, which the province passed this spring. And what it does, one part of what it does is it says you have to process certain applications, primarily zoning and site plan approval applications, within the prescribed timeframes, or else. And the or else is you're giving back money. And, that's not fun. Municipalities don't like having to give back money because, we're already looking for revenue sources. So that's not a great thing. So what a lot of municipalities are doing in response to Bill 109 in the county of Renfrew, and I was part of a working group to develop a policy response that'll be applied, generally speaking, throughout the county to deal with Bill 109. And the idea there is we're going to be front-loading this process, okay? Particularly for site plan approval. The Planning Act says we have 60 days to dispose of a site plan approval application. That's nuts. Maybe for a very, very small site plan approval application, we could dispose of it in 60 days. And maybe if we made everything a condition of site plan approval so that, in effect, your process is not being shortened. But a 60-day processing time for a complex development like Lapine or like the St. Joe's, school addition, or like, Groves Park Lodge, whatever, okay? It's just not realistic, okay? And engineers need a good look at it. Internal departments need a good look at, the fire department, the building department needs to get a look at it, make sure it's all going to work. They're going to meet code requirements. We're going to approve a site plan that then doesn't meet the building code or the fire code. That doesn't work. So 60 days. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be saying, before we say that your application is complete, we want a lot of this stuff done earlier. And we want a lot of this review done earlier. We want to be okay with your materials. We want all internal departments. We want external agencies to have signed off on your materials. So at the time we get the application, we deem it complete, we're ready to go. And maybe in that way, we're going to be able to deal with, a 60-day processing time for site plan approval. So pre-consultation used to be kind of a real short thing. It's going to be a real long thing moving forward in most municipalities. There's potentially going to be fees associated with it, and we'll be restructuring this process. Following pre-consultation, we get application submission. Okay, they actually pay their fee, they submit their materials. We then have 30 days to look at it and determine whether the application is complete. So we typically will give them a list of materials that we'd like to see with the application. We make sure they've submitted those materials. We make sure they've been prepared by qualified professionals. They're sealed, they're signed. They've submitted the applicable fee. And if they've done all that, we'll deem the application complete. We then send it out to prescribed public bodies, generally internal departments, external agencies, for review and comment. Typically give them 2 to 3 weeks. If they need more time, they'll let us know, and we'll give them more time. We got to do that within 15 days after we deem it complete. So we issue notice of the application, we circulate it to prescribed public bodies, and then we will notify the public that the application has been filed. In most cases, there are certain cases like site plan approval. Site plan approval is not a public process, is a technical process, is a process that is driven by zoning, by engineering requirements, by code requirements, and by various other legislative and policy requirements. So it is not a public process. It is not a matter of do we or do we not like this. By the time we get a site plan approval process, we have zoning in place, we have policy in place, we have code requirements in place that will dictate whether or not the site plan is approved. So there's not a whole lot of opinion that comes into play when we're talking about a site plan approval process. But for things like official plan applications, for zoning bylaw amendment applications, for for a number of other different types of applications, consent applications, variance applications, we will circulate notice to properties within the prescribed distance. For consent and minor variance, it's 60 meters of the property. For the rest of the applications where public notice is required, it's 120, and then we will post notice on the property. Okay. Time elapses after that. It's generally the review process. Traditionally, that's when you would get that review and comment phase. It would go out to agencies. We would get comments from agencies, provide those comments to the applicant. The applicant would then provide a subsequent submission, revise their materials. We would then send that out to agencies, and you would get a bit of a cycle, hopefully not longer than 2 or 3 kind of times around. And then you're kind of ready to go for a decision. After a decision the decision is typically accompanied by a staff report. So you would get a report, or if it's a delegated approval, we would prepare a report for the file, and we would attach that report for the clerks and the CAO and the mayor's benefit. And then a decision would be made either on a delegated basis or at council. For applicable applications where they are subject to appeal, it is in all cases a 20-day appeal period. So anyone who has asked for a notice of the decision of council or of the town will be notified of that decision, and then they will have 20 days typically from the date that the notice is provided to provide the notice of appeal. It's a prescribed excuse me. It's a prescribed form that the Ontario Land Tribunal issues, and there's a prescribed fee that they have to pay. And once that fee and the form is received, then we would prepare what's called a municipal record. Generally, it's a record of the full application, all public comments received, minutes of all meetings that were held. Excuse me, in respect to the application. And then, of course, the decision and reports that were produced in respect of it. Moving right along, because I'm struggling here. Excuse me. Excuse me. There are various prescribed processing times. Generally, when you're dealing with higher order applications like official plan amendments or draft plans of subdivision, provides for a longer review period, up to 120 days or about 4 months. It's at various points under different governments has been up to 210 days for an official plan review. So that's pushing like 7 months for a decision. The current government's really trimmed it down. We're down to, at the highest level, 120 days or 4 months from the time a complete application has been filed. And again, as noted, Bill 109, if we exceed those processing times for zoning bylaw amendments and site plan approval applications, you then have to start giving money back, and it's on a sliding scale, so you don't give back the whole shot right away. But after you hit certain thresholds of processing time, after the prescribed timeline, you got to start giving incrementally more money back. Next slide. Change is the only constant. This is a kind of cheeky little slide I prepared when I did a staff training presentation at the county for Bill 109, and this is just a visual illustration. I kind of get a little laugh out of this, right? 1991, the Planning Act comes out. That's give or take 30 years ago, and since that time. Over the 25 years following when the Planning Act came into place in 1991, you had about half the amendments in the first 25 years. The other half of the amendments happened in the last 7. And about a quarter of them have been in the last 4. And we've had about 4 of them in the last, I'm going to say 12 to 18 months. So just the pace at which the legislation is changing, I kind of joke, I used to be an expert in the Planning Act. I'm kind of serious, and I'm kind of not serious, I kind of am serious, because I used to buy a copy of Ontario planning legislation every year. I have like volumes of it. And in 2019, I kind of stopped buying them and just used the one online, because that one's updated pretty well instantaneously. I feel bad for the publishers like Carswell, because they issue one, I think they issue it in like March, and then the provincial government comes out with omnibus legislation in May, and all of a sudden no one wants to buy their volumes, right? So I might buy one again next year. Hopefully things settle down on the amendment side. But we have had, if you go to the next slide, we have had about 4 of them in the past 18 months, say. So we've had Bill 276, actually quite a helpful bill. To be perfectly honest, there are a number of long-standing running jokes in planning and secretary-treasurer circles. It's Sid Troyster, the authority. He's a lawyer, the authority on land division and the Planning Act provisions related to land division in the province of Ontario. He's a great guy. He's been trying to get this passed for years, probably decades. And they finally passed it in 2021, and it deals with things like you used to have to do if you wanted land to merge, and you had a consent, you were euchred. You had to convey like a square foot of land to the province so that your lot wasn't the whole of the lot that was given planning consent. And it's the most ridiculous thing ever, because no one's going to remember that square foot of land that the municipality now owns. Well, they fixed that through Bill 276, among other matters. Bill 13. Delegation of minor zoning bylaw amendments, we took advantage of that. The temporary use bylaws and lifting of holding provisions have been delegated. So that just, again, to make things easier, these are generally matters that are just not complex, uncontested. Let's just get people through the process. Bill 109, again, a big piece of legislation involving other matters, but the one everyone picked up on, refunded planning fees. Other things like that was the mandatory delegation of site plan approval authority to staff. It came out with something called the Community Infrastructure and Housing Accelerator, akin to the Minister's zoning orders, MZOs, that have kind of been popularized under the Ford government, except with Community Infrastructure and Housing Accelerator, the idea is that they're supposed to be at the request of the municipality. So they kind of go from the bottom up, whereas MZOs often also happen kind of at the request of either the developer or municipality, but the idea is that the province just kind of came down on it. Whereas the Community Infrastructure and Housing Accelerator, there's a request that's rising from the municipality. And also interestingly, they allowed municipalities, lapsed subdivisions within the last 5 years to be revived. And that's a hard line in the Planning Act. If you do not extend, typically, subdivisions are typically given draft approval for a period of about 3 years at their initial approval, and they can be extended. In the county of Renfrew, they're typically extended a year at a time. If you miss that date, you're done. Your subdivision has lapsed. You got to go through the whole process. And if you were draft approved like a long time ago and the rules were way different, you could be into a lot of money and a lot of different policy requirements. While through Bill 109, the province now allows lapsed subdivisions within the last 5 years to be revived. Bill 23, the big one that was passed recently within the last couple of weeks, or was given royal assent. Huge piece of legislation. Probably a lot of people use the word generational. There were some elements of it that were peeled back. A lot of it went forward. And us planners are, frankly, trying to get our heads around a lot of this stuff, and are going to be for some time. But, there's going to be hopefully some training rolling out. I know I've got a session on Thursday, being a joint session with OPPI and Weir Folds, that will, provide some insight into this. We're hopefully in the new year going to be having some training for council on this. I'll be doing it in Greater Madawaska as well. So we'll get our heads around this, but not a lot of it is not in effect yet. Like it's kind of either TBD or will be taking effect in the future. But there's some stuff that that's in effect, and the impacts of it are important to understand. And so yeah, it's definitely a big one. So that is all I have for this evening. So all take a breath. Hopefully that wasn't too much. But we went kind of front to back through the planning. No, we didn't go through the whole thing. We would have been here a lot longer if we went through the whole planning. But hopefully that's helpful. And if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. And then we will get into the departmental overview.
Councilor McWhorter, you have a question?
Bill 23, is that, they come out with that where more people could build on the side of their house, like a granny suite, that sort of thing, so make it a lot easier for people to utilize their property? That is kind of what I heard, but is that what it's for, actually?
Yeah. Thank you. Through you.
Send their parents to a home or something to stay on site and look after.
Yeah, and through you, Mayor Sidney. Yeah, that's one element for sure. So the Planning Act under Bill 23 now has a definition, a new concept called parcels of urban residential land. And essentially what this is land on full municipal services, residential land on full municipal services. What the legislation appears to say, and I might be educated on Thursday, but what what it appears to say on the face of it, in my review, is that we can no longer prohibit, and any zoning that's in effect that does so, and our zoning does prohibit the use of land for up to 3 residential units on all residential property on full municipal services in the province of Ontario. Any zoning that prohibits that is of no force and effect, and you cannot pass zoning bylaws that prohibit up to 3 residential units on every lot on full municipal services in the province of Ontario. That is what it appears to say. We can no longer regulate, it appears to also say we can no longer regulate things like minimum dwelling unit area. We can only require 1 parking space per resident, per unit, which we do, so we're good. Some municipalities, they require 2 for a single detached dwelling. You can only require 1 now. You have to permit stacked parking, things like that. So we'll kind of flesh that out. On the face of it, that is what it appears to say. All land in the town of Renfrew on full municipal services, now residential land, now appears to be able, or must be able to accommodate up to 3 residential units, and it's as of right. So without a zoning bylaw amendment or a minor variance, right, a building permit, and that's it.
So have they changed the setbacks, like how close a house could be to your property line? Because if they're allowing more than 1 resident basically on there, then you'd be building right on your property line.
Yeah, thank you, and through you, Mayor Sidney. So, the way it's set up is that you can have up to 3 units within the main building. So if you're talking about just a single detached dwelling, you have up to 3 units within that structure, and you can have up to 1 unit in a detached structure. So we have secondary unit provisions that we adopted this year, and what those detached structures are typically called are called coach houses. Okay, and we have provisions in our zoning bylaw that dictate setbacks and things like that. You're right. The question that's a good question, and I don't know what the answer is, to be perfectly honest with you right now. If our zoning no longer applies to restrict up to 3 residential units on a property, and I would assume that also, would include coach houses, do our setbacks survive that statement that it's of no force and effect? And we don't have an answer to that yet, to be honest with you. So more to follow.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Councillor Dick?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So I'm just trying to wrap my brain around what Councillor McWhirter said. So I have a house on my lot right now. So is what this is saying is I can take that house and make it into 3 units in that one house, and you can't touch me? No, I'm just being honest, because there might be residents out there that start doing that. And yeah, so you guys kind of know where I'm going with this, because there's a lot of residential areas in town, and now all of a sudden we're going to have 3 or 4 houses with apartment buildings in that town.
Yeah, so through you, Mayor Sidney, so that's exactly it. So it's up to 3 residential units per lot on full municipal services throughout the province of Ontario. So, and here's my guess, okay? This is my guess. The province is going to produce a regulation that's going to walk hand in hand with these new regulations, because there's you see the word prescribed, okay? Anytime you see the word prescribed in any kind of legislation, that means there's a regulation that fills in the gaps. I'm guessing there's a regulation coming on the environmental registry that they're going to put in place that kind of fleshes this out, and hopefully Thursday will be, I'll have some more education on this. Hopefully they're going to fill in some of these gaps in terms of setbacks and whatnot. I'm sure things end up on the environmental registry without a whole lot of notice. They might have thrown something up there that I haven't seen yet. So there might be people out there that have already seen a regulation, but I'm not aware of one yet, that fills in that gap about things like setbacks and whatnot. But yes, but the answer is up to 3 residential units on every fully serviced residential property in the province of Ontario.
And if I can just add, Mr. Mayor, because the CBO is here, that does not mean, though, that they're not going to need a building permit for proper fire separations for the fire code. It just means that zoning, they won't require a zoning amendment to do it. But in that case, they'd have to put in a building permit to ensure that those units are properly separated with access, egress, and still meet the building and fire code. It just means they don't have to go through a zoning process.
I'm just going to, through you, Mr. Mayor, I'm just going to switch back to the official plan. Just for curiosity's sake, when you do it every 5 years, you do it with your team, bring it to council, we just kind of look at it, and then you're like, that's our plan, or do we approve it? Like, how does that process work?
Yes, thank you, through you, Mayor Sidney. So we would typically go out to a consultant, retain a consultant qualified. It's a big project. You know, there's a lot of public consultation involved. There's a lot of comments typically come in. Typically, quite a few background studies we ask them to do. A big piece can be like growth management. This time around, we've got the highway coming. How are we going to accommodate that? They do all the background studies. There's probably going to be a series of milestone reports that either come to committee or council. And then once a revised official plan, a draft official plan is put together, we would then bring that to council for adoption. Council would adopt the amended official plan or the new official plan to repeal and replace. And then we would forward that adopted official plan to the County of Renfrew for final approval. That's the process. Very high level.
Any other questions from council? Excuse me. I just want to say thank you for that. It was very riveting. But I think the information in it, though, is crucial for council to know and see how much work. I've always said that there's so much work behind the scenes that people don't see, and I think this presentation just proves that. So not having any more questions, we'll take you back to the next part.
Thank you. And again, maybe I can make it. Again, through you, Mayor Sidney. Well, we're happy to be here tonight as a team. So this department didn't exist earlier this year. We are a new department. And we exist because council has seen fit to prioritize growth and development in the town of Renfrew. Economic development, physical development, tourism, you know, all those important elements that are going to see the town forward for the next 10, 20, 30 years, 50 years and beyond. You know, when we see something like the highway, you know, the highway expansion coming our way, and you know, people have already kind of front ran it a little bit. We're just going to see more of it, right? You know, we see, you know, in our department, we see, you know, land sales and things like that. And, you know, I can tell you that there's a lot of interest in the town of Renfrew. Yes, we are coming into a bit of an uncertain time economically, right? But those are always temporary. We will get on the other side of that, and things will pick up again. But certainly, council has made this a priority. And so, you know, the Planning and Development Department, you know, we take pride in our role in advising council, you know, on where we go from here, and we take it seriously, and we certainly appreciate you having us here this evening. And I can maybe just go to my left here, Dan Lavager, our Economic Development Officer, Ashley Rathwell, our Administrative Assistant, the backbone of the department, and then Tom Webster, our Chief Building Official. And we're all going to kind of take a turn here and provide you with some information. What I might just do real quick, if we go, we just kind of got a a little video here. It's short. Jordan, you can have it after this, by the way. It's a great, great PR piece for Mattaway. We are not claiming Mattaway as our project, just to be clear. This is just the biggest construction. This is just the biggest construction project that we have going on right now. So we said, and Tom sleeps there. Like, he's got a sleeping bag. He doesn't sleep there, but he's there every day. So anyway, we'll roll it here. It's kind of neat. There's some neat music. I don't know if it works, but yeah. That's all right. There, so we kept it shorter. It was quite a bit longer. There are a number of different passes, but it kind of gives you, it's just a neat perspective, you know. I think it's interesting to kind of see, you know, what a project like this looks like, and just kind of gives you a sense of the scale of it. And you know, we do have a ton of solar panels on the Mattaway roof, so that's great stuff. Okay, so in our departmental overview, we're going to talk, I'll just very quickly, I'm not going to spend any more time talking about planning, maybe just quickly about the function. Tom will talk a little bit about building, Dan will talk a little bit about economic development. Ashley will spend some time talking about the service delivery component and some of the things we're working on, and then we'll kind of talk about some of the more recent project highlights and things that we built in the town of Renfrew. Okay, that's me, and I don't know. I don't like my picture. Everyone's picture was way better. I look like I ate something real terrible that day. So core functions, again, long-term direction for growth and development in the town. Review and approval of Planning Act applications. We spoke at length about that. Dealing with things like encroachment bylaws and encroachment agreements, so things like seasonal patios, permanent encroachments. So if you got an old house that's kind of in the road allowance, try to deal with that through a bylaw just to recognize it. They don't have to tear it down, but it continues to exist at council's pleasure. Preparation of various types of development-related agreements, as we talked about. I look at the zoning review of certain building permit applications. We implement development-related fees and charges, including things like cash in lieu of parkland, development charges, development securities. So money that we take, securities or money that we take as part of development, as a condition of development under development or site plan agreements that provides the town with, in kind of the way it sounds, security in the event that something happens, the developer walks away, things aren't done properly, we need to fix them. We coordinate with council on cross-jurisdictional planning development matters. We kind of deal with the province as well on certain matters. We implement changes in provincial legislation and policy, as we kind of talked about. For anyone that has any complex planning and development matters, they'll typically either call myself or call Ashley. And we do represent the town on an as-needed basis as an expert witness, duly qualified at the Ontario Land Tribunal in the event that there is an appeal to the decision of the town on an eligible planning application. And we already talked a lot about legislation. I won't talk much more about it. We have the Development Charges Act, Site Plan Control Bylaw, Delegation of Authority Bylaw, Fence Bylaw, Sign Bylaw, Encroachment Policy. And I'm going to leave it at that, and I'm going to hand it over to Tom.
Well, welcome everybody. Congratulations on your election win, and also to Mayor Reeve, Warden Iman. Congratulations for the county elect over there. I'm Tom Webster. I'm the chief building official for the town, and I'm just going to walk through things as Mayor Sidney said. This may not be as riveting as the planning one was, but we'll move forward with it. I've got a lot of charts and visuals that I find appropriate for my presentation. So my role is to ensure compliance with various regulations, where the Building Code Act, the Ontario Building Code, the Fire Protection Act, Municipal Act in certain terms, and then Occupational Health and Safety Act. I maintain appropriate qualifications to perform the duties of the chief building official. Part of my role is collecting development-related fees in accordance with the council's various bylaws. I schedule on-site visits, drawing reviews, various inspections of footings, foundations, framing, plumbing, mechanical, moving forward with all those. Then the issuance of correction notices or orders, which I handle through, with the help of Ashley through our department in regard to my role. Review and update the town's building bylaw, which we done in, I think it was 2019 with the help of Carolyn. Is that correct? 19, I believe it was, for the fee bylaw. So we just recently did that, and so that's in good shape for the next few years moving forward. And then our monthly reporting, which we have to do to impact Stats Canada, Ministry of Labour, CMHC, and Ashley's helpful with that end. And then responsible for the enforcement of applicable bylaws by council. So the building bylaw and property standards bylaw. So in the property standards bylaw, there is certain things I work in conjunction with MLES for my role or his role if it's related to the building itself. So Tori, if we can go to the next slide. Okay, so during this, so inspections is a big thing within my my daily duties. So here's just an outline that the building code prescribes has to be done. So basically, any inspections, I have 48 hours starting that day to get the inspection done. If it is lapsed, then the contractor can move forward without the inspection being approved. So it's very important that, these inspections get done for the sewage system, so septic systems basically, and final occupancies. There are 5 days notice to get those inspections done. The chart below is, so when a permit is submitted, so the building is classified into different groups. So basically a house, I have 10 working days. Now, these are all office open working days that I have to have a reply, whether it's approved or not approved, and then to move forward. So as soon as if there is not something missing from the application or anything like that, the clock stops and it doesn't start again. So it's basically, if everything's there, those are the timelines that I have to approve the building permit. And those are outlined. So, but down at the bottom is post-disaster building, so that's like police stations, hydro dams and all that stuff. So those are more complex buildings. That's why there's a longer delay. So getting into charts. So we'll just look at these, and you can see year to date we're down to, it looks like we're down to 82, but you got to take this into consideration for the next slide, because these are they're important number, but they're not as important as the next numbers coming up moving forward, because they don't really tell the whole story of what's going on within the building department. Because within those 82 permits, one of those is a Lapine building, so there's 63 houses there. So we didn't add the other 62 units on this. So it's kind of deceiving those numbers. So if we go to the next slide, so the construction value. So in the recent years here, the last 2021 and year to date this year, look at the values jumping over the $40 million mark. That's very important, because that increases our building permit revenue for us to operate as departments self-sufficiently, away from taxation for the tax ratepayers of Renfrew. And then you can see it's slightly increased every year moving forward up to this year. And then coming 2023, we've already got a over $20 million project on the books, which is going to be approved early in January, which is the new school, St. Thomas over at St. Joe's. Lot development fees. So these are the fees that we've been collecting to help out with water, wastewater, fire. These are the lot development fees that we've collected. So we had a huge increase in 2021. So that was mostly due to the 2 apartment buildings which were under that year's when they applied and approved for. So 2 apartment buildings are within there, and that's why that's such an increase of over $800,000. And then this year, up to date is $415,000. Okay, so that is all I have at the moment. I'll pass it back to Director Withers or Mayor Sidney, or do you want to go right to Dan? Okay.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Dan Lavager, Economic Development Officer here at the town. I'll just go through a little bit of the highlights. I'd say I'm a little bit of the warm and fuzzy of the team, and I'm going to keep things high detail, but if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. So a little bit of my role, signature events, regional tourism initiatives, business retention and expansion, developed municipal properties. Here in Renfrew, we have 1 Innovation Drive, 550 Hall. Business and developer siting and lead generation for attraction of new businesses and industry. Vacant municipal lands and community improvement plan grants. So a little bit under the signature events, as most of you are aware, we have the Renfrew Craft Beer and Food Truck Festival, growing event, handing that over this year from Clerk Charbonneau. That has, it's an established event, and we hope to grow it in the future. We have the Bluegrass Festival, which I have not taken part in yet, but am learning a little bit of the background of the festival. And with our signature events committee, we hope to delve into that a little bit more. We're doing some in-kind support for the Ontario Winter Games. And there's a proposed third signature event through the CAO responsibilities, looking at adding a third event for the town. And again, through our signature events committee, we will be taking a look at that. And lastly, in that is the 2022-23 Economic Development and Tourism Brand that was just recently released on social, and hope to have a website released in early 2023. Moving on to business retention, expansion, and attraction. A big role in the economic development portfolio is to encourage existing local businesses to stay and grow in their community. Just on the one side is just a little blurb in regards to a lifetime value of a small employer. It definitely pays to encourage our local businesses to stay and grow. I'll talk a little bit more about community improvement grants in the coming slides. And it's large to work to understand and respond to local business needs, and that's just with working with our BIA, our area Chamber of Commerce, and finding out the needs and building relationships with the business community. Lost my slide. I'm going to touch a little bit on vacant lands. It's something that we are going to delve into in 2023, but currently we're sitting with 26 properties. That kind of gives us about 300 acres of property right now, and that is obviously in different chunks and different ratings, but it's going to be a strategy for vacant lands to be part of the Mayor's Task Force for Growth and Readiness and the Highway Expansion Committee. And then from there, recommendations and discussions from the committee will then flow through to the Economic Development, Planning and Tourism Standing Committee in hopes of creating some strategy and procedure. Keeping in mind, like I said, the zoning classification on these parcels vary from residential, commercial, industrial. And I'm happy to delve in further, but for tonight I just left it as an overview for orientation purposes. A little bit more just in regards to the town-owned properties. So 1 Innovation 550 Hall, and as part of the 2023 work plan, developed properties will be looked at and reviewed. We're going to look at items such as physical condition of the properties and tenancy in the buildings for future planning, as both these properties serve a great purpose to our community. Is there any questions?
Do you want to go through everybody, and then we'll, because there might be questions for Tom too, and Eric was
Yeah, for sure.
go through?
Hi, my name's Ashley Rathwell. I am the administrative assistant to these lovely gentlemen. So I'm just going to give a quick high-level overview of what my position entails for the service delivery in the Planning and Development Department. So I'm the department's first point of contact, whether it be through email, phone, in person. Generally, I receive questions regarding property information, planning and building inquiries. I prepare compliance reports. I've done some addressing, so assigning civic address numbers following the county's procedures. There's a great importance to keeping and maintaining our organized filing system. So it's an electronic database, as well as finding efficiencies on how to make things more electronic. I'm a commissioner of oaths, so some of our planning applications require this. I'm the operational support for all three gentlemen here for planning, economic development, and building. And then I issue the building permits, and most recently I've started working on a project of implementing e-permitting. So we spent some time researching all the different softwares, and we narrowed it down to our top 3, and then we did a couple of webinars on those 3 programs, and then most recently we decided to endeavor in a 30-day trial demo of a software program, and so far it's been working great. I've spent a lot of time on the back end of the system and creating all of the reports and the forms to make lots of efficiencies for our department, and it's been working really, really well. We're happy with it, so we're really hoping that we can go into e-permitting in early 2023. So yeah, we'd like to finish off our department's overview by showing you a couple projects that we've accomplished in the last several years.
So if I could jump in here, and I just want to, each slide has a for our department, what was all involved. So this is the dialysis that was created in 2015 at the hospital. So this section here is the dialysis. But what's more important is, I don't know if you remember, Moore Street? This street here, there were some houses taken down for more parking for this area. So it was all within planning, building, and everything that we came together at the time to create that wonderful facility over there. So that's the whole department working together to do that. If we can go to the next slide, please. So in Health Village Lane, 2017, so Stewart Street's below us. So this one is obviously a fantastic facility for everything that's going on over there. But here we go again, is the department's working together to move forward. So even though it's just a building, as we see, this road had to be created. And that was through the servicing for all that. So the whole department, again, had to come up with a plan to move forward so this facility could be built. Next one, please. So 100 Gate, I'll go into this. So the slide on the right is basically the start of the subdivision. So we're into phase 4 right now. And Eric, if you can help me, what phase, is there 6 or 7 phases, I believe, so far?
Yeah, this this next one here, they're going to try and do it all in one shot.
So what we see on the right-hand picture is basically phases 1, 2, 3, and part of 4. So way up on the top right is phase 4, and this is the bottom of phase 4 right here. So going up the street here, you see the J and the road. Going back up the street, heading back up towards No Frills, or the top left, that's going to be phase 4B or 5. They named it 5? Okay, so phase 5. So it's going to be more townhomes and single homes all the way going back up. And the extension of Hall, you can kind of see it up here. Hall Street's going to come around, and then this will loop up. So this is basically next phase 5 that's progressing forward for the 100 Gate subdivision. That's a huge subdivision, all engineered, all through planning and everything else. Okay, next picture. So Lapine Apartments, again, 2020, this was started. So it's going to be a total of 6 buildings. We've only got 3 on the go right now. They're relocating to another site, and then they're coming back to apparently finish the last 3. So what you see is buildings A, E, and B. So the next phase will be building F, D, and then building C over here. So those are the 3 remaining buildings. But as Lapine is done, they've completed all this, and I believe our Public Works Department was in there today to do some security sign-offs or something like that, so they can move forward for the next phases coming up in the near future from there. Okay, here's our beautiful Mattaway. Great shot showing everything that's going on. The Indigenous Center here, as you can see, but well under construction. And where are we here? Yeah, so that's our last slide for our presentation. For my end of it, if any of council, with the okay of Director Withers and CAO Tremblay, if council would like a tour of any of these facilities, please let me know. I could take you through, use New York boots and a hard hat and vest, depending, but you know, especially Mattaway, you know, you're well vested as council in this. Maybe you should be going through at this point to have a tour of it, and it's well on the go.
Yeah, I think actually we're, in the new year, going to be touring, I think, everything we own. All of our sites, like water plants and everything, so that is definitely going to be on the go too.
And Tom can get us into like Lapins and other places. So if you're interested, I know Tom and Eric and I toured with Monsieur Lapin, who is a great contributor to the $50,000 donation to the Ontario Winter Games. But it's really important to see these major projects for what they are, and we're really fortunate that Tom is certified in complex buildings. So those complex buildings, which they all are, Tom's able to do those inspections on behalf of the town, and we don't have to bring in outside resources to do them. So those are major institutional and commercial and public uses that most places don't have, and so it's a testament to kind of the boom that has started and hopefully continues to grow. But Tom can get us into other sites, but we are planning like an open house for all the municipal facilities.
So does council have any questions for any of these people? Councillor Dick.
That was a great presentation. I do want to tour Renfrew Power Generation because my grandfather worked there and a lot of my uncles, and I know their names are on the walls down in the old building somewhere. So I definitely want to do that. Just 2 quick questions. One, are we still slated for Mattaway expansion to open March 31st, 2023?
I can take that. We anticipate a fulsome kind of update on both budget and schedule at the January 17th meeting, when Parks and Rec and Fire and Protective Services will be presenting. So they'll do their overviews, but we'll have one kind of full session on Mattaway, why we did it, all of kind of because I think the public needs to be reminded of all of what's going in there and the major investment it is to the town's future. So we're working on that for budget purposes as well, but you'll get a fulsome kind of update on the entire project on January 17th.
Thank you, CAO. Sorry, through you, Mr. Mayor. The next question, it's more of just curiosity. I don't know if we're allowed to do it. Let me just ask the question. If the opportunity ever arose that, I don't know who would answer this, that we could buy a parcel of land from a private owner, would the town entertain buying that? Or would you be like, no, we'll let a developer buy it, they can build the houses? Or you might say, oh, we're going to buy it because maybe we'll use it in 10, 15 years. It's just a curiosity question, and I don't even know if we're allowed to do that.
I think I can start and then let these people add on. I think a lot of the land I'm not sure how we came to own so much land. I think the Industrial Commission, I know, picked up buildings during some tough times. We inherited some buildings. I don't think we would go out of our way to be landlords. And I think we're at a fortunate part in our town's history where there might be competition for some land. So even as we look to surplus some land, I think there'll be numerous developers that are running out of land elsewhere. And if you look at the boom that has occurred anywhere that there's been highway expansion, and I pulled the numbers from my last interview before I was hired, you're seeing like an 18 to 20% growth impact in about a decade at those places like Armprior and Carlton Place and Kempville. So I don't think we would go out of our way. We're very fortunate. The only situation where that occurs is where you want to create an industrial park, but we have those lands. I think we're at a point where we would be looking for private investors to buy those lands, invest in our town, and get that going. We wouldn't necessarily be looking for land. When we have purchased land, it's usually for an easement or a big sewage pipe that needs to go through, things of that nature, things that involve public works or an intersection. We wouldn't go out of our way necessarily to be acquiring lands.
Thank you.
Anybody else want to, we're good? Councilor McWhorter?
Yeah, just through you, Mayor. I'm not sure who would answer this, but we inherited Innovation Drive and where the Deloriers is through the Renfrew Industrial Commission. Is that commission gone, or did we just sort of assume the role, or?
I can try, but I wasn't here when all that happened. And you will have the unaudited financial statements that you're getting at the next meeting will include the Industrial Commission's financial statements, but we do own those facilities, but maybe the Reeve can update on the governance piece.
Thank you, and through the mayor to council. What happened was the Renfrew Industrial Commission, the contract to manage the Innovation Center was due to lapse in March of this year. And prior to that, in the fall of 2021, they approached us, so we approached them. There had been some ongoing discussions about the future. And it was a 20-year lease, a 20-year management plan or management agreement, a 10 plus 10. And during the discussions, they indicated that their board, through time, had gotten perhaps older and perhaps a little bit disinterested in continuing. They also weren't overly enthusiastic, and that's not to paint them in a negative light, about continuing where we interested, and we were looking to go in a different direction in the town at the time. And so we negotiated our way out of the lease and any long-term what might have been considered commitments, which weren't written down but may have evolved over practice or through conversation. So we had a complete release from our relationship with them. They are in the process, I believe, of wrapping up their responsibilities. They have some funds. They're going to look after their records. I think we're going to, at some point, put a plaque on the building just outlining the history of the Renfrew Industrial Commission, because as you're aware of, it was established by an order in council in, I think, approximately 1950. So it's got a long history. They had also been lending money and support and grants to various businesses over the years, and that side of their business had evaporated, and so they weren't able to generate much revenue. Their only real source of revenue was the management of the contract at Renfrew Innovation Center, which I believe was in the neighborhood of something like 4 or 5%, and it wasn't enough for them to continue. So it was a mutual parting with a contract signed, and we own the building free and clear at this point, the town of Renfrew. And so it was a good way to end a relationship. The relationship, as you have with all relationships, had ups and downs and some struggles, but for the most part, I think it was a very beneficial relationship for the community.
Any other questions? Councillor Legree.
Through you, Mayor, Sydney to, not sure who, but CAO maybe. One Innovation Drive, is it, how full is it? Like, is it 100% used up, or?
It is, and Acting Director Bulmer's helping us out in terms of the leases, for instance, and it's under the portfolio of Planning and Development, but Director Bulmer and his great experiences helping us through that. So yes, we do have a number of solid industrial tenants in that building, and quite impressive. So when we book the tours, we will ensure that that we bring you through there. So large employers with a number of staff.
Perfect, thank you.
Any other questions? All right, we will move on to F, confirmation of the minutes. That Renfrew Town Council confirm the minutes of council of December 6, 2022. I need a mover. Councillor Dick, seconded by Reeve Emo. Any questions about the minutes? Councillor McWhorter?
I just have one thing to say. I missed the last meeting, so being able to actually, I don't know if the people at home do it, but I went on YouTube, watched the meeting. It wasn't quite exciting enough to have popcorn, but it was really enlightening to be able to do that. And then Director Aslam was good enough to give me a package on it. I had some questions and concerns, and he addressed them for me, so it actually worked out pretty well. It's not the same as being here, of course, but it's almost virtually the same. So it was great format.
Excellent, thank you. Any other questions about the minutes, Ryan? All in favor? That is carried. No communications or petitions, no notice of which. Any notice of motions? No? Okay. No closed. So we'll go on to L. Excuse me, the bylaw 106-2022 listed on the agenda of December 13th, 2022 be taken as read and passed. Mover. Councilor McWhorter, second by Reeve Emo. Any questions? All in favor? Carried. Thank you, Council. Upcoming meetings, a special council meeting on December 20th at 6 o'clock, a regular council meeting January 10th and January 17th, and the committee of the whole on January 31st. And what?
And January 3rd as well.
Oh, okay. Oh, I missed that. Right, I think that's it. So it is 8:07. We are now adjourned. Thank you, council. Thank you, staff, for the great information. Have a great night.
Thank you.